Hello, everyone. Oh, y'all are so nice already. Let's keep that train going. All right, so projects like these are what I do when I'm supposed to be finishing my dissertation. So thank you for indulging me. I have seen Black Panther 4 times now. And it's interesting because every time I see it, I get more and more critical. So I'm not really sure if it's a good thing. Maybe I should just stop watching it. But yeah, so today we're gonna explore Killmonger and whether or not he sort of fits in the realm of villainy. And this idea came about because I saw so many think pieces on the internet about Killmonger and what he means and, you know, what he embodies and all that. And academia tends to, in some ways, like mimic popular culture now. So there were like several different call for papers for like just writings on Black Panther or teaching Black Panther or just anyone's thoughts about Black Panther. And this is sort of what I came up with. So journalist Stephen Thrasher, can everyone hear me? I'm like trying to get this mic together, but I'm so short. Okay, hello, okay. So journalist Stephen Thrasher wrote that racism can give Black Americans the impression that in the past we were only slaves who did not rebel, that in the present we are a passive people sort of beaten down by the police and circumstance who don't fight back, and that in the future we simply do not exist. So as it was mentioned earlier, this film, Black Panther, is a work of Afrofuturism, and some of my favorite Afrofuturist, I guess, definitions come from Yatasha Womack, who literally wrote a book entitled Afrofuturism. She beat us all to the punch. But she says that Afrofuturism inverts reality and offers a myriad of wormholes. That is so disrespectful. I'm sorry, y'all. Let me turn my phone off. A myriad of wormholes into alternate histories through which futures unbounded by trauma can be realized. So if you've seen the movie Black Panther, that's ground zero, right? Like the whole purpose of the film is it's a society that's existed for over 10,000 years that have, you know, never been colonized. Okay. Get this together. Do I point it at the, which button do I press here? I study Afrofuturism, but like secretly tech is not really my thing. I know it makes no sense. Oh, but it wasn't my fault this time. Yes. Thank you. It's the middle button? Okay. Oh. Okay. So towards the beginning of the movie, Killmonger, Eric Killmonger Stevens, right? He sort of has this moment. It's not the beginning of the movie. It's like towards the middle when he's doing the spirit walk, right? After he's sort of already claimed the throne. He says this quote, right? He's talking to his father. He's in the spirit realm. And he says, everybody dies. It's just life around here. So as we see in the beginning, you know, he grew up in this housing project in Oakland that was later condemned. You could describe it as a war zone-like environment. He joined the military, went to M.I.T. He saw a lot of things. So Killmonger he would be like in his 20s, 30s, right? He grew up sort of in the 80s, early 90s. So he was witness to a lot of things that negatively impacted the Black community. The first thing I thought of, for some very odd and unknown reason, was Rodney King, right? Because we have the Black Lives Matter movement today, and it's all about police brutality on the surface, but really it's about the everyday ways in which Black people are oppressed in this country, right? So Rodney King, over the 25 years since his incident, has been reduced to a funny one-liner. He's a joke now, right? Can't everyone just get along? And that's not even really what he said. I mean, there was no just. But The bottom line is the brutality was real, but we're left with this sort of joke about what happened. And this would have been a formative moment in Killmonger's life, right? He's growing up in the city where this happened. The cops were acquitted because that train's never late. The crack epidemic of the 80s, right? And there was a 101 ratio between crack and cocaine of people who went to jail. So if you sold or bought crack, you had a 100, you went to jail at a rate of, your prison sentence was 100 times longer than people who went to jail for cocaine. Now, at the time, who was buying crack and who was buying cocaine, right? So like, it's built into the fabric of society. And that was federal law from 1986. So persons convicted in federal court in possession of 5 grams of crack received a mandatory minimum of 5 years. And on the other hand, 500 grams of coke carried the same sentence. Who is walking around with 500 grams of coke? I don't know, maybe y'all know some people, I don't know anyone. But in 2010, the Fair Sentencing Act reduced the sentencing disparity to 18-1. So it's still quite unfair, right? But it's not 100-1. And this is all sort of under the umbrella of the war on drugs, right? Nixon's sort of great legacy. And so we're only now starting to kind of adapt this holistic approach to addiction, especially when it comes to opioids, because it affects rich white kids, right? Can we like all just agree on that? I mean, nobody cared about like poor white people in the Midwest, right, who were like dying because of meth, or people in the 80s who were going to jail because of crack, right? But now we have like, I've literally seen ads on television for like, you know, if you or one of your loved ones suffers from opioid addiction, and, you know, there's all these New York Times articles in which cops are saying they don't know what changed about how they feel about people who have addiction, but now they have so much more empathy. We know what changed, right? We can be real about it. So in Michelle Alexander's 2010 book, The New Jim Crow, she writes that felony drug convictions for crack cocaine fell disproportionately on young black men who then lost access to voting, housing, and employment opportunities. There was actually, I used to work at Rikers in a past life, and there was actually neighborhoods that had what were called $1 million blocks. And they were called that because so many people from those neighborhoods and the block within the neighborhood went to prison that it would cost the state like $1 million to fund those people in jail, just in those one blocks. So this is just, you know, painting a little bit of the environment in which Killmonger was developing, even as he knew, right, that like he is a citizen also of Wakanda. So, beginning, I'm sure we all remember this, right? So we have the British Museum, and because I'm a researcher, while I was putting this together, I went on the British Museum's website, and it states the British Museum houses a vast collection of world art and artifacts, and is free to all visitors. Isn't that nice? There are over 4 million objects in the museum of world art. So that's a lot of theft, right? And as we know, one of the things that Killmonger did very early was he called them out, right? How do you think your ancestors got those? Do you think they paid a fair price, or did they take it like they took everything else, right? And we know what he means by everything else. I mean, we live in a society that was built on imperialism and colonization, and this is a global racial capitalist society, right? So he clearly knows, we learned from the very beginning of the movie that he knows all about the history of imperialism and colonization and just is not here for it at all. And so, I think we're having, well, I'll just skip to this one. And so his last words, though they were highly dramatic, right, really highlight the relationship that he has, the sort of conflated idea that he has between being enslaved and being imprisoned. So he feels that the only way he's able to stay in Wakanda is as a prisoner. We know that he comes to Wakanda with this idea that, like, it's his country, it's his society, he's better than T'Challa, right? He can clearly best him in a fight. And that's how they pick their kings, for better or worse. I mean, it would be really interesting if in Black Panther 2 they have a whole other process for how kings are picked, because clearly there's a loophole in this one. But, you know, he comes here, he comes to Wakanda, and he chooses to not be a prisoner. Completely robbed of his birthright, right? We learn that T'Chaka decides to leave him behind after killing his brother. And he knows that he's going to be an enemy of the state. So we have this dual citizen, right? Black American and Wakandan. And he's sort of looked at as an outlaw on both sides. Like, he went to the military, but we have the CIA agent basically saying he's crazy. And, you know, we can argue later, we will argue later, about whether or not he was wrong. And, you know, he decides. He says, bury me in the ocean with my ancestors that jumped from the ships because they knew death was better than bondage. So I've seen this movie 4 times. People clapped every time, which I thought was really interesting. Like, most people were like, yes, that's right. He's really sort of, once again, hearkening to this idea that he knows his history and he knows the way that power has been misused in society. So that's just sort of my opening remarks to really get things percolating. But what we're gonna do now is sort of break out into small groups of like 5 or so. You have to talk to your neighbor. I know, I teach, that is my day job. And no matter how old people get, everyone hates this, but we're gonna do it anyway. So you're gonna break into groups of about 5, and I want you to really think about and talk about this question. So what was Killmonger / Njidaka's internal motivation for what he did and how he thought? Go forth. I'm timing this. All right, people. We're bringing it back. See, that wasn't so bad. Some of you audibly groaned, and now you're like all into it. So I want to get some of your thoughts. So for those of you who want to sort of give, you know, be the spokesperson for your group, raise your hand, wait for the mic to come around so we can all hear you, and share.
No. I didn't expect to be picked first. Do I have to stand?
I mean...
That's fine. It's cool.
Stand.
Hi. So what I think is Killmonger and Njidaka's. I hope I'm saying it right.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think it's pretty much their motivation is fear and anger behind what they were trying to do, or pretty much Killmonger trying to take back what was taken from him, because remember, the brother came in and killed his father, but never took him back to Wakanda. They pretty much just left him there just to suffer. And Njidaka's, okay, I did say it right, his internal motivation was to pretty much, I guess that time period wasn't the late 80s, I think it was early 90s during Rodney King. So it was to like...
92, yeah.
Yeah, so it was to arm, like, I mean, pretty much...
The crack epidemic was
exactly,
80s
the
to
crack
90s.
epidemic, and at the same time, crack, you know, trying to give, like, and I guess a level up for, you know, whether if it's African Americans or anyone who was going through some type of strife during that time, especially with the Rodney King thing with police brutality. So I don't think, I mean, even though it was crazy, because what are we going to do with vibranium in the 90s? Like, are we going to blow up, like, cop cars like no tomorrow? Or, you know, make a Mad Max?
We definitely don't know now, do we?
But I believe, like, fear and anger was the motivation behind it.
Okay. What's your name?
Nicole.
Thanks, Nicole. So before the next person goes, yes, clap for Nicole. Before the next person goes, I want us to be clear about Killmonger's actual motivation, right? What was his, his actual goal? Sorry, not motivation. What was he actually trying to accomplish?
Emancipation.
Okay, so world domination. What else?
Even the playing field.
Even the playing field. Okay, Bennett?
So we're clear, like, Killmonger and N'Jaka are...
They're the same person.
The same person.
Yeah. And N'Jaka is his Wakandan name, his given name, yeah.
So, from what I gathered from watching the movie, I'm sorry guys, I just came in, so...
Boo!
But I think it's twofold. I think one, and you got to see it later on in the movie as he, ingested the heart-shaped herb, was a sense of belonging because he'd been exiled from his own people for so long, and I think, in the general sense, just the larger African diaspora, just to fit in within the entire larger Black community was definitely a motivation. Just wanting to be accepted by, a royal family that didn't know he existed, and family, their literal biological families in. And the other one is reparations,
I was wondering how long it would take for that word to come up. All right, Bennett, you're forgiven for being late. Thank you. Okay, so we have his just sort of, major overarching goals, right? So now, what was his motivation? We have what Nicole said, fear. What else? Ashley.
We were talking about, we said that first it was kind of what Nicole was saying, like he was angry about, like, and even what you were saying, he was angry how he grew up, all of those things that influenced him, that, he was trying to, get reparations, get back at those who had kind of hurt him and he felt his people. But something else that we also added to that was that not only, and I'm going to kind of like change, Bennett, that was your name?
Yeah.
Like, I don't really, what we were saying, it wasn't really so much acceptance, but it was more of a bitterness. Like, because he didn't come in there, like, seeking to be a part. He came in there to dominate.
Mm-hmm.
So I think he was angry also with Wakanda, and that also added to his anger and his internal motivations to handle things the way that he did. So he was angry with everybody.
Right.
And that was essentially what we would add to what has already been said.
Thank you, Ashley. Ashley was my student. She was my favorite. You can see why. You can see why. Anyone else? One more person. Bennett, not Bennett. You pick someone, Horace. Okay.
Thank you, Horace. I'm also Ashley. I would say that his primary motivation was revenge, and that comes in different shapes. So revenge on the people who murdered his father and abandoned him at the same time, and that would be his people, and specifically T'Challa as an extension of T'Chaka, and Zori as the person who snitched on his father.
Snitches get stitches.
They did. Well, sometimes they just die, But, and then revenge on the people who, or the countries and cultures that have oppressed who he feels is his people, and that would be, Black people outside of Africa, so Black people in colonized nations, because that's who he's seeking to arm, and he's seeking to arm them to take revenge and to take over these countries on these people that have spent centuries and generations oppressing them.
Right.
I would not say that I think that he was ever seeking to belong in Wakanda, and the reason why I would say that is because he, when he asks about the field of the heart-shaped herbs, and the woman says that they're for the next king, he burns it all. And so in that scene, what I see him saying is that there will be no king after me, and at the same time, that's saying there is no Wakanda after me. I am here, I am taking over, and after I am done, this is done.
Well, that is a good place to end that segment. Thank you very much. Yeah, so he says in the movie, right? He says 2 billion people all over the world who look like us, whose lives are much harder. This is like before before the ass whipping. And Wakanda has the tools to liberate them all. Where was Wakanda, right? And everyone's just kind of like quiet. T'Challa's like on his throne. Everyone's still kind of like, who is this dude and why is he talking to us? But we never really kind of get a verbal answer to that, right? So Killmonger, yes, has come to defeat T'Challa for the throne. And his father, Njobu, facilitated in the beginning, right, the theft of vibranium in an attempt to arm all black people, across the world so that they can just sort of rise up against their oppressors. And that's why, he ends up being killed by T'Chaka. And so in a way, Killmonger comes to Wakanda as a conqueror, right? Which is what some of y'all have said. And he would be the first conqueror in Wakandan history. So T'Chaka abandons Killmonger, and I guess that's the beginning of his sort of bitterness, right? Because before that, he's being told all these stories by Njobu about this paradise, right? The sunsets are the most beautiful thing in the world. It's peaceful there. Everything's great. So he has this very, rose-hued glasses view of Wakanda before his father is killed by his brother. And so Njobu was sent as a spy, part of the whole War Dogs thing, which is why he had, the tattoo that's sort of like a key, is what they call it. But the spies were sent literally just to watch. So they're like watchers. They're not supposed to get involved in anything. And we see Njobu being really frustrated by this in the beginning. He's like, these people are oppressed, they're poor, police brutality, all these things. And we're literally here with all of this technology, and you just kind of want us to watch. So he brings up mass incarceration and all that. And this is the thing that causes the strife in the family, which is really interesting if you think about it, right? This idea that he wants to use the weapons to overthrow oppressors. And T'Chaka's like, nah. So let's go on to the next question. How do we define, that is a typo, that is terrible. I am an English professor. Shame. Did any of y'all watch Game of Thrones? The shame bell right here, shame. So how do you define villainy? And who decides that someone is a villain? That's what I want y'all to discuss. You have 5 minutes. All right, people. So, villainy. So, who wants to start? How do we define does anyone have the mic? Horace, you have the mic? Oh, you've been volunteering. See, I said I wouldn't volunteer your tribute.
Someone new because she already went.
Can we get some additional voices?
All right.
Yes.
So we were saying that villainy is defined as an opposition to the agenda of whatever side you're on. And the person who decides...
That's a good use of language.
Thank you. And the person who decides villainy is the people in power. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a bad thing, like America considered Vietnam the villains in the Vietnam War because they were going against the American agenda, but doesn't necessarily make them bad.
Y'all are stealing all my tricks. All right. Good job. All right, who else?
I guess my group is picking me. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
So, I mean, he was kind of alluding to what I was discussing with my group as far as, you know, who deciding. So there's a power dynamic there, right? So when we're talking about power, are we talking about this like as a societal dynamic? Like, is it like, you know, if it has to do with society, there's an obvious racial component, you know, especially in the context of our history and colonization. So, you know, it's, you know, what side you're on, but it's also like an overly simplistic question for a purpose, right? So it's like, okay, so who decides who's a villain? If somebody is deciding who's a villain, then, I mean, there shouldn't be, is that the question that we, I guess, should be asking? Like, as far as just using those labels in general, what is that going to do for us as a society to be putting people in the roles of hero and villain? And the reason why this movie is so dynamic and why this character is so dynamic is because he has this point of view that is representative of an entire community that has been labeled as a villain.
Right.
So, I don't know. There's a lot there. I really could talk about this all night, so.
Well, welcome. Yeah, so there's that very famous quote, history is written by the victors, right? Which speaks entirely to what you're talking about. Did someone over here say that? Yeah. Y'all know. So, anyone else? Whitney?
No pressure. I mean, so my theory was for Killmonger is that his foil is actually Nakia, and Killmonger is to what a military coup would be versus Nakia is the State Department. Because we also find her as like a spy, and she's kind of more long-term, and I think she would be sympathetic to a lot of his views. But I think like where she comes into the form of like legitimacy, and I think that's like a big key of this is like a legitimate like to take force in the way that Killmonger sort of wanted, you know, his vision, and he was enacting it, and he was gonna like force it upon, and didn't really think of like long term. Because I think a lot of times when you look at military coups, like they could be successful. Like you have somebody who transfers power. One can argue like George Washington, which because everybody listens to Hamilton, so we all know that real quick. Versus somebody like Killmonger who like destroys the herb and sees no actual future, versus like Nakia, who it might be like a slower, longer, but it might actually be a more legitimate and thoughtful process. Also men versus women, I don't know. But I think that's,
Just throw that out there.
Just throwing that out there. But that was sort of some of the views that I had when it came to Killmonger, is that I don't necessarily say he's a villain as much as like his implementation and the way that he sort of has put himself into the middle of this movement versus actually like motivating and working with the people. I don't know, I low-key believe in democracy, so that might also be why too.
Thank you.
Cool.
Oh, all right. Smart friend number one, people. Horace.
I have a lot of feelings about a lot of things. So
Talk it out. Talk it out.
There is, and I'm like 90% sure this is right, a Winston Churchill quote that says, "History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it." And I think that is how we... History will be kind to me, for I intend to write it. And that is how we tend to talk about, you know, who the villains were and the heroes were of any situation. It is the winners. It's the people who have the power to write about it and then to disseminate that writing. And so we all learn it that way.
Right.
But I think if we're talking, you know, if we want to stick, you know, to these like fictional worlds and how we talk about like villainy and heroism, there's also this middle ground where you have the anti-hero. And I think in talking about Killmonger... Can
you explain that real quick, what an anti-hero is?
I've always viewed the anti-hero as the person who isn't like the nice guy, but is the right guy. You know, I think if you...
Yes, that is so concise. I'm stealing that from you. Just so you know.
You know, I mean, I know we're talking about MCU, but in one of the Dark Knight movies, he says that, you know, I'm not the the hero that Gotham deserves. I'm the hero that they need. And I think that's how the anti-hero is usually viewed in these sorts of universes. And I think that instead of maybe asking how we decide whether or not someone is a villain, I think it could be more useful to look at how we decide whether or not someone is an anti-hero or a villain, since they can perform a lot of the same acts.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that comes down to motivation. What is their motivation behind these acts, and who and what are they willing to sacrifice to achieve their ends? I think about the Punisher, and he is very clearly an anti-hero. He's not a good guy. He kills a ton of people the entire series through, but we still see him as being sort of a hero. We still see that he is right, because the people that he's killing aren't good people, or they are people who have aligned themselves with who we see as evil, even though they themselves might be innocent. And I would think that Killmonger falls more along those lines of the anti-hero, because while he is willing to kill people, his motivations by themselves, if we take them, completely out of all of his actions and we set them to the side and we look at them, his motivations are good. And they're not necessarily selfish in the grand scheme of things, even though he does have some selfish motivations.
Okay. All right. There was a hand in the back. Oh, all right.
Okay, that's cool. No, it's okay.
Will he, won't he? No? Okay.
Hello.
Hey.
Oh, jeez. What we were kind of talking about is I feel like hero and villain are legitimate terms that have been used for a long time, and I think they're fine, but I think we use them too loosely. Like, it feels like hero and villain are the polar extremes of storytelling. And like, if you're watching Hercules, you know that Hercules is a hero and Hades is a villain, and there's no like gray area there, but good storytelling is done in the gray area. And I think the beauty of Black Panther is T'Challa isn't like a true hero and Killmonger isn't a true villain. And the fact that like the audience gets to hear both arguments and then make that choice, like that's amazing. Like, because you can easily choose Killmonger's side and be like, yeah, like Wakanda is wrong for everything they've done.
Most people I know do.
And even T'Challa himself like goes to the spirit realm and is like, Dad, what the fuck? Like, that's what have you been doing, And I think like that's the cool part, is like good storytelling's done in the gray area, and the more that we tell stories in that gray area to hear both sides and then make informed decisions on which side you want to be on and where to progress is better.
Thank you very much. Oh, he will. All right.
He's close.
Oh, we're
So you bring up an interesting point, because yes, villainy and heroism are two very loosely defined terms, but the basis on which both of those terms stand, lies within ethics and morals, which are also very much loosely defined by society, our personal beliefs, and whatever. And a villain, could be somebody who just does not align with your morals and beliefs and values.
Mm-hmm.
And this is why we're still seeing a lot of the conflicts that we're seeing between, within countries, between countries, a lot of what we're seeing within this country in particular. But on the flip side, those who do align with those morals and beliefs, which, a lot of people say, the alt-right with Donald Trump, or, communist with Vladimir Putin, they believe in that system. They take those morals as something that they align with. So, the Trumps and Putins of the world could be considered heroes for them.
right. Like Voldemort is president now, so we would probably be the villains in their eyes, right? It depends. He will.
Thanks. I just want to riff off a point Ashley made. It's like a Jay-Z lyric as well as from The Dark Knight, which is,
Jay-Z?
you die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself as the villain. So I think a lot of people...
Coming through.
So if Killmonger actually survived long enough to see his plan go through, a lot less people would see him as the hero, because you'd see what he would do, right? But because he died in this way, it's like he died kind of like a hero, and you can sympathize.
And it's so emotional, right? The last scene that he's in, he has this whole speech about his ancestors, and we're like, that's right, slavery. And then everyone is sad, right? And that's it. We don't get what happens after if he had been successful. It's a good point. Whitney?
I'm just bringing up points that I talked to you about, but like, and I hate to keep pushing it into...
Whitney, you need to use your outside voice.
I am sorry. I'm going to speak into the microphone. And I think we keep, and I hate to say, but like, it is such a foreign policy argument. This is nothing new. This idea of like, isolating yourself versus like intervening. And I think this is literally the argument that you see sort of played out, and why I will never feel okay that we didn't get the classic like villain versus hero scene where they argue out their ideology. Even though you were right, like, T'Challa like eventually does kind of come on and like intervenes, and like, you get that great scene of him at the UN after. But there just comes this point where like, this is an age-old argument of like whether or not, like when you look at like what's happening in Syria, like that is like the question that every single country is having right now, is when do you step in to help others? Right. When you keep to yourself, at some point, do you become a world power in the sort of like, where you take on that amount? Like Wakanda is now going to be way more prevalent in issues, and they're going to have to step in, and do you weigh in on everything? Like there were like moral arguments that I think Killmonger and what you saw between Wakanda are really interesting.
Right.
The end.
Bennett, did you have a comeback? Okay.
I don't mean to cut you off, but to your point, about Killmonger maybe living enough to become a villain, like, what about Wakanda? Like, Wakanda is probably going to see Black T'Challa as potentially a villain for opening his doors to a company that for a very long time was in the shadows and was very much fine without the world wanting to step in. So, I mean, these are the complex conversations that, that come into play now that this movie has happened.
Yeah, Wakabi says, right, you open the borders, you let the refugee in, and they bring their problems with them, right? That's a very real concern. Ashley, did you want to?
No, I was going to say that the quote with Jay-Z, makes sense for his song, but I actually feel like it would be the opposite, because it kind of goes back to the whole thing where the victors write history, that had Killmonger lived longer, then I think more people would have seen him as a hero, because he would have been the one writing the narrative. As kids were growing up, they would have been indoctrinated into that ideology. And as things kept going on more and more and more, it wouldn't even be where it would more, this thing Ole would be about is T'Challa, the villain.
Provocative as always. All right. Keep the party going, Horace.
She touched on something really interesting, because we keep on talking about numbers as if numbers are reminiscent of the amount of power, because it usually seems like power is concentrated in the hands of a few. I think that we get so kind of, there's such a culture in our society of talking about our nation being a democracy, we don't realize how, like, what percentage of our people are disenfranchised, and I mean our people as just Americans, and are disenfranchising each other, So it's just interesting, because if we're actually talking about more or less, those things have not really gone hand in hand with the amount of power that people has and who's deciding who's the villain and who isn't. Because, if the majority of the people are poor and you have like 5 people who have millions of dollars, it's, they're still going to be, I guess, creating the narrative. But it's interesting to talk about this, because like a lot of this, I feel like, brings like subcultures into play. So are we talking about like, if people are, smaller in numbers, do they not have a voice because it's not the voice of a many? It's just like, I don't know. The whole numbers thing kind of just.
I mean, it's called the 1%, right? Yeah. 1%. Yeah, that's a very, very good point. So I'm going to get on my nerd soapbox real quick. So villainy is literally defined as wicked or criminal behavior. And the villain is usually the antagonist, as some of y'all have said, though it can be the protagonist. And I think a lot of times when that happens, it's, you know, sort of falling within that anti-hero gray realm. So it's the character who usually tends to have a negative effect on other characters, which is also something someone has said. So according to, and here's the uber nerd part, the Chambers Dictionary of Etymology, villain comes from the Anglo-French and Old French villain, which itself descends from a late Latin word, villanus, which means farmhand. Yeah. In the sense of someone who's bound to the soil of a villa, right? Which is to say, working on the equivalent of a plantation in like late antiquity, but I guess we could also say plantation in like not late antiquity. But this is talking specifically about Italy and Gaul before it sort of became what we now know as France. Basically a lower class person. So I'm just gonna take a minute to let y'all think about that. Doesn't it say something about our society when our word for bad guy evolves from the word for everyday poor person? And who better to turn that idea on its head than Njadaka, whose birthright was stolen and ultimately never restored. And so he grew up in this poor neighborhood in Oakland, right? Just something to think about as we transition to our final question, which y'all should all have seen coming. Is Killmonger a villain? Carry on. Okay. Are we ready for the dramatic conclusion? I can't wait to hear what y'all have to say. So who wants to start? Is Killmonger a villain?
Yes.
Someone has been volunteer. Okay, all right.
I do.
Apparently Bennett has snatched the mic from Horace.
I'm sorry to be so excited like this, but one, it's my birthday. Two,
happy birthday!
Thank you. It's nice to spend my birthday with all you guys at a Think Oleo session. I think Killmonger has two ultimate goals. One is to just have Kendrick Lamar be on the soundtrack for every scene he's in.
Mission accomplished.
Pulitzer Prize winning Kendrick Lamar.
Y'all are lit. I love it.
The second goal is, it feels like it ties back to my reparations comment, but like a utopia where black people are the ones in power. And to answer the second question, based off of his actions objectively, you can consider him a villain, but there has to be that modifier of sympathetic next to him. Because, regardless of whether you side with him or not, you can understand his motives.
So Killmonger is a sympathetic villain. My aunt always says, one person's utopia is another person's dystopia. Keep that in mind.
Hello.
Hello.
So, at the end of the day, I feel like the idea of phrasing it as this dictator imposing his will on the others versus kind of letting everyone come to their own conclusion feels a bit contrived. Whereas I think when you think about it, the option is either Killmonger giving the weaponry to the oppressed, to the people who are trying to liberate, versus what T'Challa ends up doing, which is giving the weaponry and all this technology to the current ruling class, which will just make it harder for any revolution to happen in the future. It'll make it harder for any liberation movement to happen. if like the police have vibranium, if the army has vibranium. So at the end of the day, I would say that no, I don't think he's a villain.
So I'm calling somebody out from this section because I heard somebody mention Nakia, and I want that person to say what it is they said.
I don't want to talk.
So sad, so sad.
I don't want to talk, but I just thought that, like, my whole thought throughout the whole movie was like, Killmonger, like, when he talked, I was like, yes, yes. Yes, yes, yes. Then his actions, I was like, no, like, what are you doing? Like, one, what really set me off was his propensity of violence towards women. When he killed his girlfriend, when he slit the Dora Milaje's throat, and also just the joy he got of trying to torture Shuri, a 16-year-old girl. So I was like, no, I'm not on board with this. And the thing was Nakia was saying the same thing the whole movie, and no one wanted to listen to her. That's all. I mean,
okay. Yes, that is such a good point. I really want to focus on the difference between Nakia and Chidaka. Like, what was the difference ultimately? Someone yelled out violence. Violence. Let's not forget he also, like, had the old lady in that brolic hold, that one arm. It's like, that, she is a grandmother, sir. Like, what is happening? Ancestors, right? Rough. Okay, so we have violence. Someone said gender. Yes.
I think the biggest difference between the two of them is the way that they were raised, right? Nakia was
home
raised
training
in Wakanda. She has Wakandan values. So she's not going to try and overthrow a government that is hers. These are her people. This is her home. You know, Killmonger, these might be his people, but that's not his home. So even though at the end of the day, like, the things that they say are the same, the way that they view the community is different, and I think that is a motivating force behind how they behave towards the community. It's more unlikely to see people want to destroy their own people versus to destroy someone else.
Okay. Oh, we'll bring it back.
No, but to add on to that, I think it's also that she went through the current proper channels. Because, like, she kept talking to T'Challa, trying to get her point across. And, like, even, you know, you kind of saw where he was listening. Like, she just kept at it. Like, you know, she did it the right way, or as the right way is for that culture at that time. So, like, that's a big difference. Like, she still gave pushback, but she did it in a respectful manner because of her values.
Okay. Pass it on back.
I think for me, what really unites them, I know we've been talking a lot about what divides them as people. I actually think they'd be a really great dream team. But I think that they both
if he had lived.
Exactly. I think they both had a real sense of the cost of inaction and how important it is to step out of normal bounds in order to create change. And they understood that there's an opportunity cost and there's lost potential if you leave people who need help to float at a loss at sea and potentially never have a real chance at life. And so I think Killmonger comes from a really good place. I think we talked a lot about intent, and that his intent is sympathetic and empathetic, but that his actions are just crazy. And so I think that he just needed someone to temper him a bit, but he'd be a good second hand, a revolutionary spirit to her.
Hashtag the movie that could have been. All right. Pass it on over.
I wonder how many generations or just years in general it would have taken for change to have come without N'Jadaka. You know, you can see at the beginning of the movie, T'Challa hears Nakia, right? Like, he hears her, he understands what she's saying.
Stop taking my ending arguments.
But he's not trying to do anything about it.
As she continues. Thank you. Pass it back.
Oh, God.
It wasn't me that time.
I also, we were talking about this earlier in like the first group, like wondering like, okay, so aside from Killmonger's like growing up in his circumstances, he went into the military and he was trained to kill. So I always thought like, okay, so what if he didn't go to the army? What if he went to MIT and went a different path? Like, A, would we even be having this talk? And like, would we, you know what I mean? That's one of the things I have in my head is like, how would he have gone through with what he wanted to do if he didn't go into a military where the operative was trained to be a murderer?
Right.
I was gonna say something related to something Ashley said like 3 times ago, but going back to your question now, I think T'Challa is coming from a place of comfort, and to go to inaction, it's easy to not take action, not think you have to take action and pass off decisions to somebody else or to a different generation when there's no direct consequence to you. And you can see that with, you know, when Killmonger's father was killed, like they didn't take him back because they weren't willing to look like 2 generations into the future or even 20 years from now when he grows up to an adult.
Right.
What is the result of us, these people with power, not fulfilling our responsibility to this person? And then as a society, in this society where we have comfort, if we just pass off any sort of responsibility that we might take for other people, it's not going to hurt us today. It might not hurt us for a generation or 2 generations, but you can't, I think the message is you can't separate yourself from the rest of the world because all of the things that you do now do have an impact in the future.
Yep. Chickens come home to roost. Y'all are getting all my Black American colloquialisms tonight.
I had a thought, just piggybacking off of what you said about next generational impact. When I think about just the entire story and the timeline, basically, if just one tiny thing had been different in this case, if Killmonger hadn't come to Wakanda, hadn't been with his militaristic views, basically if his father hadn't, you know, tried to plan a rebellion and had been killed, all these events, basically if Killmonger had not come to Wakanda and done these things, would T'Challa have ever decided to open up and give resources to other country, like the social center that he wants to build in the apartment at the very end? Because it really seemed to me like the truth of his cousin just really shook him to his core, that it was just such a major family secret, basically, that he had that confrontation with his dad in the spirit realm. And if so, that means just what does it mean for Killmonger if he maybe inadvertently, because it doesn't seem to be what he wanted, ended up causing this really huge good that impacted the entire world and probably positively impacted Wakanda as well and taught T'Challa leadership.
All right. Just take all of my final notes. It's fine. It's all right. I don't need them. That's why I have you guys. Anyone else?
So I'm going to say that Killmonger is a villain, but I will say that when I watched this movie and he died, I cried my eyes out because when I saw him die, I saw his pain. And when I saw his pain, I felt like it was me, like it was my family. And even if we put that label on him as a villain, we need to take responsibility, and I think that that's kind of where T'Challa, I feel like there's a good juxtaposition between T'Challa being who he was and Killmonger being who he was, because it forces us to look at ourselves and take responsibility for creating someone like that. And if we're going to say that we created that, then like, what are we going to do about this? This is a person who was in pain and was hurt, and it was preventable. So it's really about the sense of responsibility and seeing him just because he was in pain and he didn't do what followed our you know, our society's laws does not make him less than human. And that was kind of the big thing for me.
All right. And then this lady.
Hello.
Hello.
I personally didn't think Killmonger was a villain. I kind of thought he was the hero, although I do understand where everybody's coming from. He was in the army and he killed all those people. And the army rewarded him, you know, like, yeah, we had a mission to go out and kill and conquer and divide. And here's your plaque. You know what I mean? It's why all of a sudden he's a villain now that he wants to do the same thing to his own, well, not to his own people, but to his government who got rid of his people just the way they did to other countries. So me, personally, I didn't think he was a villain. I thought T'Challa and his father was the villain. And for the simple fact is, at the end of the day, this is your family. Regardless of where they grew up, you still got to take care of them. And you just left him there as a child. Like, not even thinking, like, hey, this is our family. That was my brother's son. I have to take care of him. He didn't even leave him a cent to, like,
right. That was
take
his
care of
whole
yourself.
nephew. His
Right.
whole nephew he left behind.
Right.
Just watching the plane fly away, right?
Exactly. And to go with Ashley said earlier, you saying that T'Challa was listening to Nakia every time she brought up the fact like we need to help other countries and stuff like that. I didn't see it that way because every time she brought that up, he also brought up the fact that we should get back together. You should be my queen. Like, no. I'm talking about something serious and you're talking about a relationship? Come on. That's my personal opinion. I'm going to clarify you, Ashley. But
I'm just saying.
The other Ashley,
I think I just wanted to note that there's a massive difference between somebody like T'Challa in power saying, okay, this has been our policy so far, and now we're going to turn it around a bit, and we're going to change how we do things. And, you know, Killmonger kind of going, I have no power in this situation. I have no power, but still I'm going to fight the system, because the system to me feels oppressive and unfair, and I'm going to do everything I can. And, of course, his means are going to be incredibly different, like a magnitude of difference to T'Challa's.
Right.
I just wanted to put that out there as a thing. Like, yes, the means are going to be different when you have no power to when you have all the power.
Yes, absolutely. Ashley? Anyone? All right. And then my closing statements that all of you have already taken. Still going to force you to listen to it.
No, I was just, a few comments back when we were talking about T'Challa and Killmonger and how he became the thing, and even how T'Challa ultimately made the decision to, you know, be more inclusive with the rest of the world. But I think something else that we also have to remember is that real change has to have a catalyst. Like, something has to provoke it. And I think because even I would honestly not really say that T'Challa was the villain, because when he realized what happened to his cousin, that's when he started to shift. When he realized that something had been wrong to his people, that's when he opened his eyes, and which ultimately brought about change. And I think that that was with something else, was that with Killmonger, he realizes that this is actually affecting my people. Like, before, the whole reason why they never opened their borders was because it was, we have to protect our people.
Right.
But with Killmonger, he now realizes, wait a minute, this is my people too. And I think that changed his mindset, which also caused him to do what he ultimately did.
That is an excellent segue. I knew I could count on you, Ashley. Yes. Give yourselves a round of applause. Absolutely, right? So, like, it's one thing to have these war dogs who are just watching, right? But they're being affected by their environments, which is something that people never seem to think is going to happen for some reason. And this affectation and what it ultimately gives us in Killmonger is really what inspires change. But ultimately, Killmonger's goal is world domination. Like, he legit says the sun will never set on the Wakandan Empire, right? Which is, echoing the old saying about the British Empire, but it drives the point pretty clearly home. Still, it's obviously not as simple as it seems. I mean, the echo of the old British Empire slogan suggests that his motive is more reactionary than anything, which is some of y'all have said, fear and all that. So T'Challa tells Killmonger during that epic battle, you want to see us become just like the people you hate so much. And Killmonger says, I learned from my enemies. And T'Challa says, you have become them, right? But regardless, T'Challa's encounter with Killmonger does lead him to end Wakanda's isolation. And he starts a Wakandan outreach center in the very building in which his father killed his uncle in Oakland, right? That was the scene where Shuri was like, I thought we were going to Coachella. This is perhaps the beginning of a more effective revolution for the African diaspora. And one can argue that it is all because of Eric Killmonger Stevens / Njidaka. He has all the names. So I'm going to leave you with this African proverb that was sort of everywhere when I was doing this research. The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. Thank you.